The sun was only a pale suggestion along the jagged line of the Red Mountains when Robert Baratheon drew his horse to a snorting halt. Dawn clung to the stones in a thin copper wash, painting the lonely tower ahead of them with a sheen that reminded him, absurdly, of blood left too long to dry. "That's it?" he asked, voice rough with too little sleep and too much memory. "The place from your dream?" Eddard Stark reined in beside him, gray cloak snapping in the high Dornish wind. His eyes were fixed on the white tower rising from the barren slope, as if he could see straight through the pale stone to whatever waited within. "Yes," Ned said quietly, "the Tower of Joy." Robert snorted, though there was no mirth in it. Joy. The Targaryens always did have a gift for pretty lies. He shifted his warhammer over one broad shoulder, feeling the familiar weight pull at his muscles in a comforting drag. "If Rhaegar is in there, I'll show him joy." Rhaegar. Even thinking the name soured Robert's mouth, like he had bitten into a rot-soft apple. Rhaegar on the trident with rubies bursting from his breastplate. Rhaegar in Lyanna's bed, in Lyanna's life. Rhaegar everywhere in the cracks of Robert's dreams, turning what had once been simple, ale, hunting, women, war, into something tangled and ugly. Behind them, the little company of Northmen and Storm Lords shifted uneasily in their saddles. Howland Reed of Greywater Watch sat small and wiry on his garron, eyes narrowed against the wind. Ethan Glover, Martin Castle, Theo Wool, they all stared at the tower as if it might rear up and strike. "Robert," Ned said, and the man who would be king turned his head. "Whatever we find in there, we take it together. Do you understand?" Robert laughed, a low rumble that did not quite mask the tremor in his chest. "If he's in there, I'll take his head and you can have his harp, Ned. That's as together as it needs to be." But he saw the tension in his friend's jaw, the hollows carved beneath his eyes by too many sleepless nights. Lyanna was a ghost between them, the third rider who never cast a shadow, and Robert felt her as keenly as he felt the Dornish wind on his face. He kicked his horse into motion because if he stayed still any longer he might turn and ride away, and that he could not bear. "Come on then," he growled. "Let's see what joy a dragon's tower holds." They descended the slope at a steady trot, hooves grinding the loose scree beneath them. With every yard, the tower grew larger and more unreal, a single pale tooth thrust into the sky. At its foot, horses waited, tethered to an iron ring in the stone. 3 of them, sleek and courser strong, their breath steaming in the chill. And between the tower and the men who sought it, 3 white shapes. Robert saw the glimmer of their cloaks first, then the gleam of enamel-smooth plate. By the time they drew close enough to dismount, his jaw was clenched so tight it ached. The man in the middle wore no helm. His pale hair was tied back, his face calm as a still lake. The sword at his hip did not shine like ordinary steel. It shone like dawn breaking. "Ser Arthur Dayne," Ned murmured. Robert spat into the dust. "Good. I'd have hated to ride all this way for some nameless whelp." They stepped forward together, Robert's warhammer hanging easy in his fist, Ned's sword still sheathed but ready. Sand whispered around their boots. Behind them, their men fanned out, a ragged half-circle of northern mail and Stormland leather facing 3 perfect white shapes. "Lord Stark," said Ser Arthur, inclining his head. His eyes flicked to Robert, cool and assessing. "Lord Baratheon, or should I call you something else, after your charming victory on the trident?" "Call me the man who broke your prince," Robert replied. "Call me the man who will break you if you don't step aside." On Arthur's left, Ser Gerald Hightower's jaw tightened. "You killed a prince," he said. "You did not break him." Robert's lips peeled back from his teeth. "He broke himself the day he stole Lyanna." The name hung there, shivering, like an arrow loosed and waiting to find flesh. Robert felt it leave his mouth and knew there was no turning aside now. "You know why we're here," Ned said. "We've come for my sister." Ser Arthur's gaze did not waver. "We swore a vow," he said simply. Robert's fingers tightened on the haft of his hammer. "You swore to protect a mad king and his line. The king is dead." His line is broken. Is it? Arthur's eyes, gray as Ned's but colder, flickered up toward the tower window, a black slit against the dawn-bright stone. Some vows do not end with a man's breath. Robert felt his heart slam against his ribs. There it was, the shadow at the center of all this. Rhaegar's seed, Rhaegar's bastards, Rhaegar's whatever in that tower, wrapped in Ned's dreams and Lyanna's scent of blue winter roses. His hand shook once, almost imperceptibly, and then went still. "You will move," he said low, "or you will die." There were a few more words, but later Robert could not have recalled them. Honor, oaths, kings, all those thin things men used to dress up the simple art of killing. In the end, it came down to steel and strength. Ser Arthur moved first, in a blur of white cloak and pale blade. Dawn hissed free of its scabbard like light itself, and Robert barely got his hammer up in time to turn the first cut. The impact shuddered up his arms, numbing his fingers. Gods, but the stories had not lied. He laughed. It burst out of him, a roar of sound that felt like it might crack the stone. "Finally," he said, eyes alight, "someone who can swing a sword." Arthur's reply was another strike, downward and precise. Dawn hissed through the air and Robert met it, hammerhead smashing against starbright steel. Sparks sprayed in a brief, shining arc, fading even as they fell. Around them, the world erupted. Ned's sword flashed as he met Ser Gerald, their blades ringing in time with the harsh rattle of men colliding. Reed's spear darting like a snake, Castle going down under a white-cloaked shoulder, Will bellowing as he drove his axe toward Went's shield. The sound of it all, steel on steel, steel on bone, the wet choke of air trying to stay in a body it no longer belonged to, twisted together into the familiar chaos of battle. Robert gave himself to it. There, at least, things were simple. He loved the way his hammer tore the air, the heavy satisfaction when it connected with shield or plate. Arthur was fast, faster than any man his size had a right to be, dancing aside from blows that would have caved in lesser skulls. "You killed him on the trident," Arthur said between strikes. "Do you think this washes the blood away?" Robert snarled. "I'd kill him again if I could, and you with him." Arthur's blade kissed his cheek, a shallow cut that burned. Robert lunged, feinted low, then swung high, the hammer whistling toward Arthur's head. Dawn met it at the last instant, the two weapons locking in a grating, inching struggle. Muscles screamed in Robert's shoulders. Arthur's teeth were bared, sweat slick on his brow. For a heartbeat, their faces were inches apart. Baratheon's broad and dark, Dayne's pale and fine-cut. Robert saw his own fury mirrored in those gray eyes, but behind Arthur's he glimpsed something colder. Duty. "Lyanna did not scream," Arthur said softly. "Not when." Robert roared, an animal sound, and threw his weight forward. The words vanished in the crash as the hammer twisted, wrenching Dawn offline. For the first time, Arthur's balance slipped. It was the smallest thing, a shift in his feet, a slight widening of his stance. But Robert had built his life on such moments. He twisted his hips, driving all his strength into a brutal backswing. The hammer caught Arthur in the ribs, and there was a crack like a tree trunk splintering in winter. Arthur staggered, cloak flaring. Robert did not think. He brought the hammer down. The hammer's second blow struck nearer Arthur's shoulder, but it was enough. The Kingsguard knight dropped to one knee, breath leaving him in a shudder. Dawn tilted from his grasp and slid point first into the sand, the pale blade almost beautiful where it lay, spattered with red. Robert drew in a harsh lungful of air. His arms trembled. His cheek burned. Somewhere, distant, he could hear the dying wails of men. The battle was nearly over. He knew that sound. Arthur lifted his head. Something like surprise flickered over his face, and then a wry, faint smile. "So this is how the sword of the morning sets," he murmured. "On the end of my hammer," Robert said. He tried to sound triumphant, but the words came out hoarse. He had imagined this moment in 20 different ways. He had pictured Arthur sneering, pleading, cursing. He had expected to feel exultant, as he had when Rhaegar's rubies had flown from the prince's breast, studding the trident with their glittering lie. But Arthur only looked tired, human, a man who had stood too long in one place and finally been asked to move. Behind them, Ned drove his sword through Ser Gerald's throat, the White Knight collapsing like a felled pillar. Howland Reed's spear was lodged in Ser Oswell's side. Went twitched once, twice, and then lay still. The dust settled around them, tasting of iron and old slate. Arthur's gaze drifted past Robert, toward the tower. "We kept our oath," he said. "Whatever you find inside, remember that." Robert's hands tightened on the haft until his knuckles blanched. Lyanna was in there. Lyanna, who had laughed in winter courtyards and thrown snowballs at his head. Lyanna, whose memory had driven him through a year of war, through the endless press of bodies and steel, through the moment he had caved in Rhaegar's chest. Lyanna taken. "Your oath was to a thief," he said, "and a madman's line." Arthur's smile did not change. "Our oath was to the realm. You will see." He swayed. Robert thought he meant to rise, to snatch Dawn and try some last doomed strike. The men behind him tensed, but Arthur only lowered his head, as if bowing, and the light went out of his eyes. The white cloak slumped, folding over itself. Dawn lay half-buried in the blood-soaked sand. For a moment no one moved. The wind tugged at the dead men's cloaks, trying to raise them back to life. Ned approached, sword held loosely, face gray. He looked from Arthur's body to Robert's blood-spattered face, then to the tower. "It's done," he said. "No," Robert replied, his voice low, almost wondering. "It isn't." He turned toward the Tower of Joy. The stairs spiraled up in a tight, airless coil, the stone cool beneath Robert's gauntlet hand. His breath hollowed against the walls, the sounds of the battlefield fading behind him with each step. First the clash of steel, then the groans, until even the wind was a muted memory. "Lyanna!" Ned's voice cracked the silence ahead, raw and desperate. Robert took the steps two at a time, heart pounding. The tower smelled of old stone and something underneath it. Copper and salt and the sweet, cloying rot of flowers shut away from the sun. When he reached the top, he almost did not recognize her. Lyanna Stark lay amid a chaos of tangled sheets, their linen gone brown where blood had dried. Her dark hair clung to her temples in damp curls. Her skin, once flushed with the easy color of northern winters, was waxen. Blue roses were scattered on the bed and floor, their petals bruised, their stems knocked from a silver vase that lay on its side. The smell of them, sharp, cold, impossibly out of place in this hot Dornish room, clawed at his throat. Ned was already at her side, kneeling, his hands hovering uselessly over her as if he did not know where to touch. "Lya," he whispered. "I'm here. It's Ned." Her eyes fluttered open. For a moment they were cloudy, unfocused, wandering the room as if looking for a shape that wasn't there. Then they found Ned, and something like peace flickered through them. "Ned," she breathed. Her voice was a scrap of sound. "You came." Robert moved forward, the weight of his hammer suddenly ridiculous in his hand. He set it down by the door, feeling suddenly clumsy in his armor, too large for the room. The smell of roses was everywhere. "Lya," he said, and the word felt like it might break his teeth. "It's me, Robert." Her gaze shifted, slow as the turn of seasons. When it settled on him, he braced for anger, for accusation, for some cutting Stark word about the war and the bodies and the boy he had smashed in a river. Instead, she smiled. It was tiny, crooked, barely there, but it was a smile. "You look terrible," she whispered. A laugh tore from him, half-sob. "You should see the other man." A sound came from the shadowed corner of the room. Robert turned, hand instinctively dipping toward a sword he was not wearing. A woman stood there, older, with Dornish coloring and a thin, tight mouth. In her arms, a swaddled bundle squirmed and let out a thin, indignant wail. The sound sliced through the room, sharp and new. Robert felt it like a knife under the ribs. The babe's cry rose and fell, thin but relentless, like a distant horn on a foggy moor. The Dornish woman shifted him automatically, rocking with the unconscious rhythm of someone who had done this many times before. "Who is that?" Robert asked, though he already knew the answer. Some part of him had known since he saw the tethered horses below, since Arthur's grim eyes flicked to the tower window. Perhaps since the day he first heard that Lyanna had vanished with Rhaegar Targaryen. Lyanna licked her lips, breath coming in shallow, uneven sips. "Ned," she whispered, her eyes never leaving her brother's face. "Promise me." Ned swallowed. "Lya, just tell us. Promise me," she pressed, a flicker of the old steel in her. "On our father's name, on Winterfell, on the heart tree." Robert stepped closer, boots sinking into the rushes. He could see the babe's face now, the way his tiny hands flexed against the cloth, the hint of dark hair plastered to his damp skull. His eyes were squeezed shut in outraged effort, but when they fluttered open for a moment, Robert caught a glimpse of gray. Stark gray, Lyanna's gray. It hit him like a blow. "Is that?" His throat closed. He looked at Ned, but Ned was staring at Lyanna, eyes bright with tears. "His name is Jon," Lyanna whispered, each word seeming to cost her. "Jon Snow." Robert heard the name like an echo from another life. Jon Arryn had been their rock, their guide, their quiet, patient father in all but blood. That Lyanna had chosen his name for her child sparked something almost like warmth in Robert's chest, even as anger roiled beneath. "Rhaegar's whelp," he said, the words rough and ugly. Lyanna's gaze snapped to him, clear and sharp and suddenly, fiercely alive. "My son," she hissed, more strength in that single breath than he had heard from her since they entered. "Not his, not anymore." The babe quieted for a moment, as if listening. She reached out, fingers trembling, and Ned took her hand at once, pressing it to his cheek. Robert stood there, feeling like an intruder in his own story, watching the two Starks bound together by something thicker than the blood on the sheets. "Robert," she said, turning her head slightly. "Come closer." He did, slowly, as if approaching a cliff's edge. The nurse shifted aside, and suddenly the child was between them, a frail bridge. "Look at him," Lyanna murmured. "He didn't ask for crowns or songs or war. He didn't ask for any of this." Robert stared. The child's features were still soft, unfixed, but he could not help himself. He hunted for the prince in them, for some sign of silver hair or violet eyes, some mark of dragon. But all he could see was the faint suggestion of Lyanna's nose, the shadow of her mouth, the promise of gray eyes. Something in his chest twisted. "Rhaegar is dead," Lyanna whispered. "You killed him, whatever he wanted, whatever songs he sang. They're ash now." Robert's jaw worked. Rhaegar dead on the trident, water running red, rubies skipping across the current like stones. Rhaegar's chest caved in beneath his hammer. Rhaegar's harp silenced. It had been the purest moment of his life, simple and bright. "Then why," he said, each word dragged, "do I find his bastard in your bed?" Lyanna's fingers closed around his wrist with surprising strength. Her grip was fever-hot. "He is innocent," she said. "Do you hear me, Robert? Innocent. You can hate Rhaegar. You can hate me for running. But if you let your hatred fall on this child, then you are no better than the man you overthrew." The words landed like hammer blows of their own. Robert opened his mouth, ready with anger, with all the hurt of stolen years and broken betrothals, but they died on his tongue. He looked down at the tiny face, scrunched and pink and utterly bewildered by the world he had been thrust into. He remembered being a boy in the halls of Storm's End, trailing after his mother's skirts, his father's booming laugh echoing off the stone. He remembered hearing, much later, about his parents' carriage broken on a mountain road, about bodies crushed and bones snapped like twigs. The empty ache of those days when only Jon Arryn's steady hand had kept him from unraveling. This boy had no such hand, not yet. "He's Rhaegar's son," Robert said, but the protest sounded weak even to his own ears. Lyanna's eyes softened. "He's mine," she said, "and he could be yours. Not in blood, maybe, but names and crowns are only what men agree they are. You know that better than anyone." Ned made a small sound, somewhere between a sob and a laugh. "Lya, you're asking too much. I'm asking for a vow," she insisted. "Robert, I know you. I know what you can be when you're not drunk on glory and wine. Swear to me you'll protect him. Swear on your hammer, on your honor, on whatever gods you have left." Her hand slipped from his wrist to his hand, small and shaking, the same hand that had once thrown a wreath of blue roses around his neck at Harrenhal. He remembered the scent of them, sharp and cold even in that spring air. "Promise me, Robert," she whispered. "Promise you'll raise him as your son, as your heir. Promise you'll never let them call him dragonspawn." Silence pressed against the walls, heavy as a storm waiting to break. Robert felt Ned's gaze on him, felt the weight of a realm trembling on his answer. He looked at the child again. "Jon, Lyanna's Jon." Slowly, he sank to one knee beside the bed. His joints creaked. The hammer calluses on his hands looked grotesque against the delicate bones of Lyanna's fingers. He bowed his head. "I swear," he said hoarsely. "By the Seven, by the old gods, by every bloody tree in your wolf-haunted north, I'll raise him as my own. I'll call him son. I'll protect him with my life and with my crown. No man will name him dragon while I draw breath." Lyanna exhaled, a sound like winter wind slipping through leaves. Her grip slackened. A faint, relieved smile touched her lips. "That's all I wanted," she murmured. "You always were so stubborn, Robert." The fever had burned her hollow, and once the vow was spoken, it seemed to take the last of her with it. Her breaths grew shallower, spaced further apart, as though even the effort of drawing air was too much. Ned clutched her hand, pressing his forehead to their entwined fingers. Robert stood back, feeling suddenly too large, too clumsy in a world that required gentler hands. The Dornish woman placed the babe in his arms with a look that was half fear, half resignation. He had held many things. Tankards, swords, women, his warhammer most of all. Holding the child was nothing like any of that. Jon was heavier than he looked, small body, warm and solid. His tiny fingers flexed against Robert's chest, catching on the leather of his jerkin. "Lya," Ned whispered, voice breaking. "Don't go, please." Her eyes fluttered open one last time. She looked at her brother, at the man she had once agreed to marry, at the child in his arms. For a heartbeat, they were all bound together in a web of blood and promise and the thin, fragile thread of mercy. "Winterfell," she sighed. "Keep him safe." Then her chest rose one last time and fell, and did not rise again. The room seemed to shudder. Ned bowed over her hand, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Robert stood frozen, Jon's small weight an anchor that kept him from flying apart. The rose's scent turned sickly sweet, cloying in his nose. He had imagined finding her 100 times. In those imaginings she had been laughing, furious, cold, forgiving. He had seen himself sweeping her into his arms, promising her the world, placing Rhaegar's head at her feet. He had never imagined this, her body cooling on a blood-soaked bed, his arms full of another man's child. He swallowed hard. His throat tasted of iron. "Lya," he said softly. It was a useless word now, an offering tossed into a well with no bottom. Ned stayed kneeling for a long time. When he finally rose, his face was stiff. The tears dried in thin tracks. He looked 10 years older than he had that morning. "She's gone," he said needlessly. Robert shifted Jon in his arms. The child had fallen asleep, oblivious to the weight his birth had placed upon him. His tiny chest rose and fell against Robert's mail. "No," Robert said, surprising himself. "Not while he lives." Ned's gaze dropped to the baby. For a moment, Robert thought he would argue, that he would call for the child to be sent away, hidden, anything but this tangled knot. Instead, Ned only nodded once, sharply. "We'll build her a cairn outside," he said. "She would have hated being shut up in here." They laid Lyanna Stark to rest beneath the open sky, with stones piled high and roses, those same impossible blue roses, placed atop the mound. Robert stood over the gravesite, Jon cradled in the crook of one arm, his hammer hanging from the other hand. The wind tugged at his hair, at the edge of the child's linen wrap. "I'll keep my vow," he said quietly to the stones, to the roses, to the memory of a girl who had ridden like the wind and laughed like breaking ice, whatever it costs. The road north from Dorne felt longer than all the battles of the war combined. They buried the Kingsguard where they fell, marked by simple stones and the memory of white cloaks reddened by loyalty. Then they turned their backs on the Tower of Joy and rode, taking with them one more burden than they had arrived with. Jon traveled wrapped in linens and furs, swaddled tight against the chill that deepened as they left the desert behind. At first, the babe slept fitfully, waking with thin cries that set the nerves of hardened warriors on edge. But as the days wore on, he settled, as if the rhythm of the horses and the murmured voices soothed some instinctive fear. Robert rode with him often, the child tucked securely in the crook of his arm while the reins lay loose in his other hand. Men glanced at the sight and quickly looked away, unsure whether to smile or avert their eyes. Kings, or those who would be kings, did not usually carry babes into war. "He looks like her," Robert said once, when the campfire had burned low and the men lay scattered under the stars. Jon slept against his chest, small mouth slack. Ned sat opposite him, hands wrapped around a cup of cooled ale. "Of course he does," Ned replied. "She was his mother." Robert snorted softly. "I half expected him to come out with silver hair and purple eyes," he admitted. "Some mark of the dragon." Ned's gaze softened as it rested on the sleeping child. "Blood is blood," he said. "Sometimes it tells, sometimes it doesn't. He is what he is." "What he is," Robert said slowly, "is the only part of Rhaegar I didn't kill." The admission hung there, heavy and unwelcome. Ned's jaw tightened. "You swore to protect him," he reminded. "I remember," Robert snapped, too quickly. Jon stirred against him, tiny fingers flexing. Robert gentled his voice, rocking slightly until the babe settled. "I remember," he repeated, quieter. "Every God's damned word." He thought often of how this would look when they reached the next waytown, the next Lord's Hall. A bastard in the rebels' arms. Questions would come, and after the questions, whispers. He imagined the faces in King's Landing when he rode through the gates with this child and a crown on his head. "Jon Storm," he said aloud, testing the name. Jon for Aaron, who had shaped a lord out of an orphan boy. Storm for the bastards of his line. Safer for now than any truer name. Ned's mouth thinned. "You mean to keep him at your side?" Robert met his gaze across the fire. "I swore I'd raise him as my own," he said. "I won't hide him in some forgotten corner. Let them see. Let them know I keep my vows." "And when you take a queen?" Ned asked quietly. "When there are other sons?" Robert looked down at the sleeping babe. Lyanna's son. His son now by oath if not by blood. "Then the realm will have to learn," he said, "that love is not so neatly lined up in a maester's scroll." By the time they reached King's Landing, the city still smelled of smoke. The dragon skulls had been dragged from their hooks, the banners had been changed, and men shouted Robert's name in the streets. But the air carried an aftertaste of fire and blood that clung to the back of the throat. They crowned him not long after, in a ceremony that blurred together in Robert's memory. Gold laid heavy on his brow, cheers beating against his ears like surf, the iron throne's twisted blades looming behind him. He drank, he roared, he lifted his hammer in triumph. Somewhere in the great hall, the child dozed in the arms of a nurse, unaware that the world had shifted on its axis. Cersei Lannister arrived soon after, bright as a new-minted coin in her green velvet and gold. Tywin's daughter, given as the price of peace, a lioness placed in a stag's hall. Her eyes, when she looked at Jon, were cool and assessing, like a jeweler appraising a flaw in a gem. "A royal bastard so soon?" she said with a smile that showed no teeth. "You have wasted no time, my lord." "My son," Robert said bluntly. "Dornish mother. It was a long war." Cersei's gaze lingered on the babe's dark hair, his solemn, storm-gray eyes. "How fortunate," she murmured, "that he took after you so faithfully." That night, when the revels had died down and even the most tenacious of his new court had stumbled to their beds, Robert found himself in a quiet chamber overlooking the black ribbon of the Blackwater. The Iron Throne stood in the great hall beyond, an ugly promise of mornings to come. Jon lay in a small cradle for once, not in a nurse's arms. The carved wood seemed far too large for him. He looked like a lone traveler marooned in a hostile land. Robert lifted him, unable to resist the impulse. The boy settled against his chest with a soft sigh, as if relieved to find something familiar in this cold new palace. "You don't know it yet," Robert muttered, rocking him gently. "But you've ruined my life, you little wretch." Jon blinked up at him, unconcerned. He should have hated the boy. Part of him still wanted to. It would have been simpler to send him away, to consign him to some out-of-the-way keep or a far-off foster house, to forget that Lyanna had ever lain in Rhaegar's bed. But every time he tried to imagine giving the order, he remembered the feel of Lyanna's fingers on his, the rasp of her voice. "Promise me." He traced one blunt finger along the curve of Jon's cheek. The child's skin was impossibly soft, unmarked by sun or wind or war. "I'll make you my heir," he said softly, the words forming themselves without conscious thought. "One day, when I've put this realm back together and there's time to teach you what a king should be, I'll give you a better world than the one I took." The admission startled him. He had not spoken it even to Ned, had barely allowed himself to think it. Yet now, in the hush of the chamber, with only the child as witness, it felt like the only truth he had left. Outside, the city shifted and murmured, a great beast dreaming fitfully. Inside, Robert Baratheon, new-made king, old soldier, grieving lover, held the son of his dead betrothed and his dead enemy and felt, for the first time since the Trident, something like hope crack through the armor of his rage. "Sleep, Jon," he said. "Sleep while you can. The world will come for you soon enough." Jon's eyelids drooped, his breathing evened. Robert sat there in the candlelit dark, a crown waiting for him on a nearby table, a kingdom snarled in debts and grudges. He tightened his arms around the child, as if by holding him he might hold back the future as well. In the heat of a King's Landing afternoon, the Red Keep's training yard shimmered like a mirage. Sunlight glanced from helm and mail, painting bright spears of light on the stone. Guards sparred, squires fetched water. Steel rang on steel in a music that had become the pulse of the new regime. In the center of it all, a boy swung a wooden sword with the ferocity of a grown man. Jon's blows came in quick, chopping arcs, his padded jerkin dark with sweat. His opponent, a lean Stormlands lad a year or two older, had the reach and the weight, but no answer for the relentless drive behind Jon's strikes. The boy's face screwed up with effort as he backpedaled, boots scraping dust. "Keep your feet under you," bellowed Ser Aaron Santagar from the shade of the wall. "He'll knock you on your arse if you dance like that. Gods help me." On the balcony overlooking the yard, Robert Baratheon leaned forward, thick forearms braced on the stone. His beard had thickened since the war, threaded already with a few errant strands of gray, but his laughter was the same booming thing that had echoed off campaign tents and castle walls alike. "Look at him, Ned," he said, "like a little storm come loose." Eddard Stark stood a step back from the parapet. In the linen and wool he favored even here in the south. The heat sat poorly on him. Sweat had dampened his dark hair at the temples, and his jaw was set with the habitual stark unease of a man too far from snow. His eyes, though, were intent on the boy below. Jon feinted left, then darted right, bringing his sword down in a quick, hard arc against his opponent's exposed shoulder. The crack of wood rang out. The other boy yelped and stumbled, dropping to one knee. Dust puffed up around him. "Yield," Jon gasped, chest heaving. "Yield," the Stormlander echoed sourly, rubbing at his shoulder. The yard erupted in a small chorus of cheers and jeers. On the balcony opposite Robert and Ned, Cersei Lannister sat in a carved chair cushioned with green velvet, her golden hair coiled intricately around her head. Her women clustered at her back like a bank of perfumed shadows. Her gaze tracked the boys' every movement with cool focus, as a cat might follow a bird. Beside her, Joffrey leaned on the rail, lips twisted. He was near Jon's age, his hair bright as spun gold, his face too pretty by half. "It's only a wooden sword," he muttered. "Any fool can swing one that hard if he doesn't care whether he breaks someone's arm." Cersei glanced sidelong at him, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. "Then show them you can win without breaking anything," she said. "That's what a true king does." Joffrey's mouth thinned. He watched as Jon stepped back, flushed and grinning despite the stitch in his side. The news that the king was watching always did that to him. Set his heart pounding and his tongue thick. He knew what the others whispered. Bastard, Stormborn, Dornborn, Kingsguard. And he knew that the king called him son. Both things sat side by side inside his chest like two ill-matched stones. He wiped his brow with the back of his wrist and turned back to the rack for another sword, already eager for the next bout. As he moved, he felt eyes on him. The open warmth of Robert's, the guarded weight of Ned's, and, like a draft from a colder room, the assessing chill of Cersei Lannister. Above, the Queen's fingers tightened briefly on Joffrey's shoulder. "Watch him," she murmured, so softly that only her son could hear. "Learn what they praise, so you may take it from him later." By 12, Jon's limbs had begun their awkward stretch toward manhood. All elbows and knees and sudden, disconcerting strength. The softness of childhood had burned off him in the heat of the yard, leaving lean muscle and a drought of patience for anything that did not involve sword, saddle, or the wild stories of the men who guarded his father's throne. The sun had slipped low, turning the sky above the red keep a bruised violet, when Ser Jaime Lannister tossed aside his cloak and stepped into the circle. "Come, wolf cub," he called, drawing his sword in one smooth, unthinking motion. The blade caught the fading light, flashing. "Show me what all these fine masters have managed with you." Murmurs rippled through the watching men. It was no small thing for the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard to spar with a royal bastard. Courtiers would make 3 different kinds of gossip out of it before the hour was out. Jon swallowed, fingers tightening on the hilt of his blunted tourney blade. The weight felt suddenly unfamiliar, his grip clumsy. He had fought squires, guardsmen, even the odd reckless knight, but Jaime Lannister was something else. The Kingslayer, the Lion of the Rock, a man whose name traveled ahead of him like a trumpet. "Remember your feet," Ser Barristan said quietly from the rail. "And do not watch his sword. Watch him." Jon nodded, though he wasn't sure the old knight had seen. His heart thudded, loud in his ears. Somewhere above, on the gallery, he knew Robert would be watching, cup in hand. Joffrey might be there too, or might not. His presence had become like the coming of autumn storms. Unpredictable, unwelcome, inevitable. Jaime rolled his shoulders, loose and amused. "Ready?" "Yes, sir." The first exchange was over so quickly Jon almost missed it. Jaime stepped in, blade whispering through the air, and Jon's instincts screamed. He brought his own sword up in a hasty parry and felt the jolt travel from wrist to shoulder. "Good," Jaime said. "Again." They circled. Jaime's movements were economy made flesh. No wasted steps, no wild, showy cuts like the ones Jon sometimes saw in the yard when knights forgot they weren't on tourney grounds. Every feint had purpose, every turn of the wrist measured. Jon tried to find space in that, a gap in the Golden Knight's rhythm. He remembered Santigar's shouts, Barristan's quiet corrections, the rare, gruff pointer Sandor Clegane had thrown his way between curses. He watched Jaime's shoulders instead of his sword, the shift of weight in his hips. He lunged. Jaime parried, laughed, riposted. The dance went on. Sweat trickled down Jon's spine. His breath came harsh and loud. "Faster," Jaime murmured. "You'll never beat a Kingsguard if you move like a Northman in a snowdrift." The jibe sparked something in Jon. He feinted clumsily, then corrected mid-strike, letting instinct and the memory of a dozen bruises guide him. His blade slipped past Jaime's guard and tapped, light but undeniable, against the older man's mail. A cheer went up from the yard. Jaime stepped back, eyebrows raised. For a heartbeat, the easy amusement left his face, replaced by something like respect. Then it was gone, hidden beneath that lazy half-smile he wore like a second helm. "Well struck," he said. "Do that again in 10 years and I'll start worrying." From the balcony, Robert's laughter rolled down, thunder following lightning. "Did you see that, Ned?" he shouted. "I told you he'd give a Kingsguard trouble before his voice even drops." Ned did not answer, not loudly enough for Jon to hear. Watching from the shadows of a nearby arch, he saw the way Jaime clapped Jon on the shoulder, the way the boy's face lit with shy pride. He also saw, further along the gallery, the thin line of Cersei's mouth as she turned away, golden hair catching the torchlight like flame. In those small motions, Ned Stark read a future others pretended not to see. On days when the weight of the crown did not drive him out into the yard or the hunt, Robert dragged his son into the small council chamber. "Let him hear what it means to rule," he told Ned the first time, waving away the other man's quiet concern. "He's quick enough with a blade. Best he learns what to do with parchment and coin, too." So Jon found himself at the long oaken table, feet not quite touching the floor, listening to men argue over ships and stores and the price of grain. The chamber smelled of wax and dust and the faint, sour tang of old secrets. Stannis Baratheon sat ramrod straight, his dark hair thinning, his jaw clenched. He spoke of ships, of hulls and sails, and the need to command the narrow sea if they were to keep this crown Robert had hammered onto his head. When he talked, his hands made small, precise gestures, as if trimming invisible sails. Renly slouched further down the table, green doublet bright as spring. He made jokes that made some of the older men frown and the younger ones smother laughter. When he spoke in earnest, it was of tourneys and spectacle, of keeping the small folks' love with pageantry and bread. Between them, like bookends enclosing a tale that might yet devour the realm, sat Varys and Peter Baelish. The eunuch's hands were folded over his round belly, his bald head bowed in an attitude of meek attention. Only his eyes moved, flicking from face to face, weighing, measuring. Littlefinger toyed with a quill, twirling it between deft fingers. His smiles were soft, apologetic, as if he were perpetually amused to find himself in such exalted company. But when he spoke of coin, of debts and loans and quiet arrangements with the Iron Bank, his words flowed smooth and sharp as a thin blade. "Gold makes the wheels turn, your grace," he would say. "We can always find more of it, if we know whose hands to shake." Jon watched them all. He watched his father, too. How Robert's attention would wander, his eyes glazing as the talk turned to counting casks of wine or bales of wool. The king would wake when war was mentioned, when the conversation circled near to battles and old glories. His hands would tighten on the arms of his chair, as if he still held a hammer there. Once, as Varys droned gently about disturbances in the Riverlands, Robert leaned over and nudged Jon with an elbow thick as an oak branch. "What do you think, boy?" he asked, not quite bothering to lower his voice. "Should we put every bloody man with a sword in the saddle and ride down this Gregor Clegane? Or let Tywin Lannister leash his own dogs?" Silence fell around the table like snow. All eyes turned toward Jon. He felt as if he had been pushed into the yard with a sword far too heavy for him. He swallowed. His voice wobbled at first, then steadied. "If we do nothing, the small folk will think the crown is afraid," he said slowly. "But if we ride out every time some lord lets his men run wild, there'll be no one left to hold the city." Stannis's gaze sharpened. Renly tilted his head, intrigued. Varys's lips curved in the suggestion of a smile. "So what would you do, Jon?" Robert pressed, eyes bright with ale and mischief. Jon thought of the stories the guards told, of raided villages and burnt fields. He thought of the way the small folk spat when they spoke of the Mad King, and how their voices softened when they spoke of Robert's victory. "Send someone you trust," he said at last. "Give him enough men to show your strength, but not so many you leave the city with no guards. Let the small folk see that the king does not ignore their suffering. And let Lord Tywin see that he does not rule the realm from Casterly Rock." A faint flush rose in his cheeks as he spoke the last, but the words were out now, hanging in the air. Robert threw back his head and laughed. "Hear that, Stannis? The boy's more sense than half the men at this table." Stannis gave Jon a long, measuring look. "Sense," he said at last, "is only useful if paired with law." After the meeting, as the counselors filed out in their rustle of silk and leather, Littlefinger paused beside Jon's chair. "Well said," he murmured, too quietly for the others to hear. "You'll make us all quite nervous one day, I think." Jon wasn't sure if it was meant as a compliment. The library was one of the few places in the Red Keep that smelled clean. Dust and parchment, ink and leather. That was the scent of it, dry and still, unmarred by the sweat and wine and secrets that soaked every other stone. Jon had found his way there on his own at first, ducking the aftermath of a feast where Robert had drunk himself into a stupor and Cersei's gaze had become a hard, bright thing. The noise of the hall, harps and laughter and shouted boasts, had chased him up corridors until he pushed open a heavy oak door and found, instead of more noise, a hush so deep it made his ears ring. Maester Pycelle smiled his slow, creaking smile and waved him toward the stacks. "Books are a safer battlefield for a growing prince than the yard," he wheezed. "I'm no prince," Jon muttered out of habit, but he took the offer. He read histories first. The Conquest, the Dance of the Dragons, the Blackfire Rebellions. He traced with his eyes the rise and fall of Targaryen kings, their names blurring together until only the vivid ones stood out. Aegon with his sisters astride dragons, Aerys with his wildfire and whispers. In margins and half-faded illuminations, he saw dragons twisting around towers, breathing fire over kneeling lords. He lingered over the pages that spoke of Rhaegar. There were fewer than he expected. "A prince who loved books and harp more than sword," said one chronicle. "A man who believed in prophecies," said another, in a cramped hand as if the maester himself had been ashamed to put such foolishness to parchment. None of them mentioned Lyanna Stark. None explained how a prince so beloved of the people had come to steal a northern maid from her betrothed, sparking a war that toppled a dynasty. Jon snapped that book shut harder than he intended. The sound echoed through the shelves. He flinched, half expecting a shushing voice to descend upon him. But the library remained still. He rose and wandered between the stacks, fingers trailing over spines. His candle cast a small circle of light, leaving most of the room in shadow. On one wall, high and half obscured by shelving, the curve of old bone jutted from darkness. A dragon skull, small compared to the monsters once displayed beneath the throne room, but large enough to make him feel the weight of its empty eye sockets. He tipped the candle up, studying it. The story spoke of dragons as terror and glory both, as weapons that had carved the 7 kingdoms into one. Standing under that hollow gaze, Jon felt something else. A strange, distant kinship, as if he and the dead beast shared some secret neither of them fully understood. "Dragons are not so frightening when they're reduced to bone, are they?" The voice came from the doorway, soft and smooth. Jon turned sharply. Varys stood there, his robes a shimmering pool of lavender and cream. His hands were folded, his expression mild. "I didn't mean to intrude, my lord," Jon said. He wasn't sure whether to bow. The eunuch always muddled the lines between courtesy and condescension. "You intrude on nothing," Varys assured him. "This is the king's library, and you are the king's son." The slight pause before the last word did not escape Jon. "Does it trouble you?" Varys continued gently. "Reading of dragons whose line ended beneath your father's hammer?" Jon looked back at the skull. "We still have their bones," he said. "That doesn't feel like an end." Varys's smile flickered. "Bones remember nothing, my dear boy." Jon thought of the north, though he had never seen it. of barrow mounds and crypts, of stories whispered of kings who still listened beneath the stone. "I'm not so sure," he said. Varys tilted his head, curious. "You are very much your parents' son," he murmured. "You see ghosts where others see only dust." The word parents sat oddly in the air between them. Jon felt it like a tug on a loose thread he had never quite managed to find. The whispers, the careful omissions, the way certain questions made Ned Stark's face shut down like a barred gate. It all pooled in his chest. "Who was my mother?" he asked suddenly. The eunuch's eyes widened a fraction. The first real crack in his placid mask Jon had seen. "That is a question for your father," Varys said. "My father says she was Dornish," Jon replied. "A camp follower, a tavern girl. It changes depending on his mood and how much he's drunk." Varys's gaze lingered a heartbeat too long on Jon's gray eyes. "Does it matter?" he asked softly. Jon looked again at the dragon's skull, at the old bone that remembered nothing. "Yes," he said, and the word felt like a vow. The north rose to meet them in long, slow breaths of colder air. The farther they rode from the capital, the more the land opened, unrolling in wild greens and browns that made Jon's chest ache with a nostalgia he had no right to claim. He had spent his life in stone and salt. The red keep's red walls, the stink and bustle of King's Landing's teeming streets, the reek of the Blackwater at low tide. The stories the northern guards told by southern fires. Of forests that whispered, of snows that swallowed a man to the waist, of skies so clear the stars looked close enough to pluck from the dark, had always sounded half like lies. Now he rode beneath a sky the color of iron, felt the bite of a wind that did not care for gold or crowns, and thought home. Ahead, the king's banners snapped, crowned stag rampant on fields of gold. Beside them flew the dire wolf of House Stark, gray on white. Robert rode at their head, thick in the saddle, his cloak fur-lined against the chill. Ned Stark kept pace at his side, his face easing as the land flattened and the air grew sharp. Jon fell in just behind them. He wore Baratheon colors now more often than not, black and gold stark against the drab hues of the Northmen's cloaks. But the cloak clasp at his throat was worked in dull silver, shaped in the head of a wolf. "You look more like a Stark with every mile," Robert grumbled on the third day north of the neck, though there was a hint of pride in it. Jon glanced at him. "Would you rather I'd worn the fox and flowers of the Reach?" he asked. The jest came more easily than it once had. Years in the king's orbit had rubbed some of the stiffness from him. Robert barked a laugh. "Gods, no. One Tyrell in this realm is enough to give a man hives." Ned's mouth twitched, though he did not quite smile. "You too might find less to jest over once you meet Lady Catelyn," he said. "She has had years to think on my bringing the king's household into her hall." Jon's hands tightened on the reins. He had heard enough, in corridors and behind hands, to know that the Lady of Winterfell did not think much of bastards, royal or otherwise. "Your lady will endure it for a king's visit," Robert said. "And for mine." Ned's gaze flicked briefly to Jon, then away. "We shall see," he said. As they crested a hill on the sixth day, the wind shifted. It carried a new scent, wood smoke and something older, colder. Jon lifted his head, inhaling. "There," Ned said quietly. Winterfell rose from the earth like it had grown there, stone-rooted as deep as any tree. Its walls were thick and dark, broken by towers that seemed less like decorations and more like stalwart fists clenched against the sky. Steam drifted from somewhere within, a ghost of warmth against the chill. Jon's heart thudded in an odd, stumbling rhythm. He had walked the halls of the Red Keep, had stood beneath the dragon skulls in the throne room, had slept in chambers once occupied by princes long dead. None of it had prepared him for the sight of Winterfell. It looked solid, as if all the tempests of men's making, the wars, the feasts, the whispered plots, could break upon its stones and slide away, leaving the core unchanged. For the first time in his life, Jon understood why Ned Stark's eyes had always seemed half elsewhere, fixed on some point far beyond the walls of King's Landing. "Home," Ned murmured. Jon did not say the word aloud, but as they rode down toward the open gates, where figures waited to greet their king and their lord, he felt it settle in his bones. The courtyard was a flurry of movement when they rode in, the kind that only seemed like chaos until you looked closer and saw the pattern. Servants lined the walls, their breath pale in the cold air. Guards stood at attention, cloaks stirring. Somewhere nearby, unseen, the hot springs exhaled mist that curled like ghosts over stone. At the center of it all, the Stark family waited. Robb stood almost level with Jon in height, his hair a richer auburn than Ned's dark, his eyes the clear, open blue of the Tullus. Beside him, Sansa held herself very straight, her hands folded, her dress of soft wolf gray trimmed with blue. Arya shifted from foot to foot, more interest in her gaze than decorum, while Bran craned his neck to see past everyone, Rickon fidgeting at his side. Lady Catelyn stood before them all. She wore her authority as easily as her cloak, her face composed in the polite, measured welcome of a great lady greeting a king. Only her eyes, when they flicked over the approaching party, betrayed anything more complex. Robert swung down from his horse with the practiced ease of a man who had made battlefields his second home. He strode forward, arms spread, booming greetings. Ned dismounted more quietly, peeling away to meet his family with a brief, fierce embrace. Jon hesitated a heartbeat longer in the saddle. His fingers had gone numb on the reins, though whether from cold or nerves he could not say. Then he slid down. The ground felt firmer here than in the south, the packed earth honest under his boots. He smoothed his cloak, suddenly aware of every stitch out of place, every mark on his plain black leathers. Robb broke from the line with a grin. "Jon?" he blurted, then checked himself, glancing at his father and the king. "I mean, you're..." "Jon is fine," Jon said quickly, grinning back despite the tightness in his chest. He had met Robb once, years ago in the capital, when the younger boy had been more interested in the novelty of a dragon skull than in a half-brother with strange titles. Now they faced each other as near equals in age, trying to bridge the gap between south and north. "You've grown," Robb said, clapping his forearm. "So have you." Arya edged forward, eyes bright. "Is it true you fought Ser Jaime?" she demanded. Jon blinked. "Sparred," he corrected. "And he was toying with me." Arya's lips curled in fierce admiration anyway. "I want to spar with you," she declared. "Arya," Catelyn said sharply. The Lady of Winterfell had finally turned her full attention on Jon. Her gaze was cool, deliberate, taking in the set of his shoulders, the fall of his cloak, the way his hair curled damply at his neck from the cold air. "Lady Catelyn," Jon said, bowing. He tried to make it deep enough for respect and shallow enough for dignity, and ended up with something in between that felt all wrong. "Lord Jon," she replied, the title scraped like stone. "Winterfell welcomes the king's household." Her eyes slid past him to where Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen dismounted with careful, court-taught grace. She moved forward to greet them, all gracious smiles and ladle-like warmth. Jon stepped back, the place in the air where her regard had been closing like water. "Don't mind her," Arya said under her breath, sidling up at his elbow. "She doesn't like anyone who might make things untidy." "Arya," Sansa hissed, scandalized. Jon swallowed a laugh. The sudden ache behind his ribs was harder to ignore. He looked up to find Ned watching him. There was apology in the older man's eyes, and something like pride, and a sorrow so deep Jon couldn't begin to trace its roots. "Welcome to Winterfell, Jon," Ned said simply. For all the layered courtesies, for all the weight of eyes and banners and kings, it was those 4 words that settled something in Jon, like a stone finding its proper place. The Godswold felt older than the castle that ringed it. Even in the thin wash of moonlight, the heart tree loomed, its pale trunk streaked with sap that might have been dried blood, its carved face watching with eyes red as old wounds. Jon pulled his fur cloak tighter around his shoulders and tried not to shiver. The chill here was not just the bite of northern air. It was a deeper cold, the sense of something vast and patient listening. Ned stood beside him, his own breath steaming. He had dismissed the guards at the edge of the grove with a look, leaving only himself and Jon amid the rustle of leaves and the quiet drip of water from some unseen source. A torch lay on the bank of the black pool, its light dancing on the ripples. "We used to play here, my siblings and I," Ned said, his voice low. "Brandon would climb that tree and jump into the water, swearing it was no colder than a summer pond. Lyanna," he trailed off. The name hung between them, fragile as a spider's web. Jon swallowed. "My Lady Lyanna," he said, giving the dead girl a title he did not quite understand he had the right to. Ned's mouth twisted. "Your aunt," he corrected gently. They stood in silence for a time, listening to the soft hiss of wind in the leaves. Somewhere above, ravens shifted in the branches, their claws clicking softly on bark. "You brought me here for a reason," Jon said at last. He had learned in King's Landing that men did few things without purpose, no matter how they might pretend otherwise. Ned nodded slowly. The torchlight carved deep lines into his face, making him look suddenly very old. "When I was your age, my father stood me before this tree and asked me what kind of man I meant to be," he said. "I thought it a foolish question at the time. I told him I would be a good one, as if that were enough." Jon watched the water. In the wavering reflection he saw his own face, half-shadowed, half-lit. Dark hair, gray eyes, the beginnings of the hard lines war and worry would one day carve. What did he say? He said that good men are made, not born. By choices. Ned's gaze shifted to Jon. "You are being raised for choices most boys never have to make." Jon's heart stuttered. "Because of my father?" he asked. He meant Robert, but the word snagged in his throat. "Because of many things," Ned said. Jon almost asked then. The question rose, hot and desperate. "Who was my mother? Why do you look at me like you owe me something no one has named? Why does the queen hold me at arm's length while the king pulls me close?" But when he met Ned's eyes, he saw a wall there. Not cold, but impenetrable. A promise made in blood and bone. "Do you ever wish I had been fostered elsewhere?" Jon asked instead. "Sent to Dragonstone or the Vale?" Ned's brows drew together. "No." The word came out more sharply than Jon expected. He tempered it. "Robert wanted you near. I was not unhappy to see you often." The admission warmed something in Jon, though the Godswold was still cold. "Winterfell suits you," Ned said after a moment. "You move through it as if you'd walked these halls your whole life." Jon looked at the heart tree, at the face carved into its wood, at the way the red leaves whispered where no wind seemed to touch them. "It feels," he groped for the word. "Honest." Ned's gaze softened. "A rare thing in this world." They stood for a while longer, two dark figures beneath red leaves, before turning back toward the castle. As they walked away, Jon felt the weight of the tree's gaze between his shoulder blades, as if some old god had noted his presence and tucked it away for later. The feast in Winterfell blazed against the long northern night. Fires roared in the hearths, their heat chasing back the chill that crept under the hall doors. Ale and wine flowed, meat turned on spits, and the smell of roasting boar and baking bread mingled in a heavy, comforting fog. Jon sat halfway down the high table, between Robb and a broad-shouldered Karstark whose name he kept forgetting. Across from him, Arya picked at a trencher, more interested in flicking peas at Sansa when she thought their mother wasn't looking. Bran peppered a long-suffering old knight with questions about giants and grumpkins. At the head of the table, Robert held court with his cup. Twice already he had called for his warhammer to be brought in, so he could demonstrate some remembered blow from the trident, and twice Ned had quietly diverted him with talk of hunting. "Tomorrow," Robert boomed, slapping Ned on the shoulder hard enough to make him sway, "we'll find a proper northern boar. None of these soft Southron pigs. You'll ride with us, boy, won't you?" It took Jon a heartbeat to realize the question was aimed at him. He straightened, eyes wide. "If you wish it, your grace," he said. Robert snorted. "Don't call me that when I'm 3 cups in." "Robert will do. Or father when your queen isn't listening." Laughter rippled down the table. Jon felt his ears go hot. He was aware all at once of how many eyes were on him. The northern lords gauging the king's bastard, the southern men watching the way their ruler bestowed favor, the Stark children assessing this subtle shift in the gravity of their world. At Ned's side, Catelyn's fingers tightened on her cup. Her smile didn't falter, but there was a whiteness at the corners of her mouth. "He's proud of you," Robb murmured under the noise, nudging Jon with his elbow. "You should see how he speaks of you when you're not there to blush at it." Jon wasn't sure whether that made things better or worse. Further down the table, Joffrey pushed at his food. His face was composed, but resentment flickered in the tightness around his eyes. Each time Robert laughed at something Jon said, each time the king clapped his bastard son on the back or told some story of his prowess in the yard, Joffrey's shoulders stiffened a fraction more. Why should he hunt with father? Joffrey muttered at last, too low for most to hear but not for the queen beside him. "He's no prince." Cersei's hand settled lightly on his arm. "He is what your father has chosen to make him," she said. "As you are." Joffrey scowled. "I am his heir. For now," she replied, her smile never reaching her eyes. "Which is why you must be cleverer than he is." She nodded infinitesimally toward Jon, who was laughing at something Robb had said, his face bright in the firelight. "Watch," she said. "Listen. Learn what the North loves, what your father loves. Then be that, but more." Joffrey's gaze tracked to Jon, to the easy way the northern boys accepted him, to the stark simplicity of their camaraderie. He saw in it something he could neither understand nor imitate without tearing off too much of his own skin. He looked away, toward the tapestries of long-dead Stark kings and queens, and imagined them kneeling. They left Winterfell under a sky that threatened snow. The courtyard that had been full of noise and color on their arrival now held a different kind of hum. The snort of horses, the creak of leather, the murmur of men checking straps and saddles. Servants moved quickly through the ordered chaos, handing up last bundles, taking last messages. Jon mounted his horse with a heaviness in his limbs that had nothing to do with sleep. The week at Winterfell had moved through him like a dream he wasn't prepared to wake from. He could still feel the rough grain of the practice yard's wooden targets beneath his palms, still hear the splash and hiss of the hot springs, still smell the cold, clean air of the battlements at dawn. On the wall above the gate, Robb stood with Arya at his side. Robb raised a hand in farewell, his grin bright even in the thin light. Arya waved both arms, her hair escaping its braids in wild tangles. "Come back," she shouted, unbothered by the watching guards. "And bring your sword this time. I want a proper bout." Jon smiled, lifting a hand in return. "You'll be better than me by then," he called back. "Not if you keep fighting kings," she retorted. Catelyn stood a little apart, her children clustered around her. Her smile for Jon was polite, distant, but she did not look away as quickly as she might have. Whether that was courtesy for the king's bastard or some grudging acknowledgement of the boy's place in her husband's orbit, Jon could not say. Ned approached his horse, pausing to rest a hand briefly on Jon's knee before moving on. The touch was light, but it steadied Jon more than any stirrup. "Right to Robb," Ned said quietly. "And to me. The ravens still find their way south, no matter what storms blow." "I will, my lord," Jon said. Lord. Father. He had never quite found the right word for the man. Robert bellowed orders at the head of the column, eager to be away, already speaking of the hunt he would hold as soon as they were clear of the northern roads. His breath steamed in the cold, his cheeks ruddy beneath his beard. As the gates creaked open and the column began to move, Jon twisted in the saddle for one last look. Winterfell's walls loomed solid and unchanged, the banners at their heights snapping in the chill wind. Smoke rose from the chimneys, evidence of lives that would go on without him, of halls that would still hold warmth and laughter long after he returned to the tangled heat and intrigue of the South. He felt a pull in his chest, as if some part of him were being left behind, snagged on those dark stones. "You are the king's son," he reminded himself. Your place is at his side. But as the castle slipped from view, swallowed by the gentle drift of snow, another truth sat beside it. That in the north, among wolves and snow and stone, he had felt less like an intruder in someone else's story than he ever had beneath the dragon bones of the Red Keep. He rode south with a new kind of weight. The knowledge that somewhere in the world there was a place that felt like it could have been his, if things had been a little different, if vows had broken another way. The Raven arrived 3 days after the king and his bastard son returned from the north. Cersei found the letter on the table in her solar, the Stark direwolf pressed into the broken wax. The script within was neat, uncompromising, as she had expected from Eddard Stark. He spoke of his gratitude for the king's visit, of the honor done to Winterfell, of the joy his children had taken in the royal household, and of Jon. Your son comported himself with honor, one line read. The North sees much of you in him. She read that sentence twice, a slow, poisonous heat rising under her skin. The North sees much of you in him. She could hear it already in the murmurs that ran through the corridors. The king's boy, the wolf cub, he rides like a northerner, some said, fights like a Stormlander, thinks like a Stark. The king dotes on him, others whispered, more than on his golden-haired, green-eyed prince. She crushed the parchment slowly in one hand, feeling the fiber give. Behind her, Joffrey lounged on the balcony rail, staring down at the city. The setting sun painted the roofs and alleys in copper and gold, making squalor look almost noble. His hair caught the light, a bright, perfect banner. Is it from father? He asked without turning. From Lord Stark, Cersei answered. He sniffed. Has he finally begged forgiveness for bringing his wolves south? On the contrary, she said. He sends thanks. And news. She moved to stand beside him, the crumpled letter still in her hand. They looked like a painting, a queen and her boy, framed against the dying light. Jon hunted well, she said. Rides well, speaks well. Joffrey's jaw clenched. They're all so fond of reminding me. Cersei reached out and smoothed a lock of hair from his forehead, the gesture tender on the surface. Then we must give them better things to talk about, she murmured. You are the prince. The heir. That boy is a shadow, nothing more. A very solid shadow, Joffrey said. Father trains him with Jaime, brings him to council. He never takes me to council. Because you are a child and Jon is being made into a weapon, Cersei thought. Because your father cannot bear to see himself reflected clearly in anyone but that bastard. Aloud she said, Your father is a fool, but he is the king. We must be clever where he is not. She opened her hand, letting the wrinkled parchment unfurl. The ink glistened faintly in the fading light. The North sees much of him in the boy, she said. That will make them loyal to him, perhaps loyal enough to forget their own. Joffrey's eyes darkened. He'll not take what's mine. No, Cersei agreed. He won't, but you must not be the one to strike at him. That would only make him martyr and you tyrant. She turned the letter between her fingers, considering. There are other ways to weaken a man than with a knife, she continued softly. We can starve him of friends, of teachers, of favors. We can make him feel alone in every room he enters. We can let your father's esteem become a burden instead of a gift. Joffrey listened, his young face set in a mask of concentration that made him look, for a fleeting instant, very much like his grandfather. How? He asked. Cersei smiled, thin and cold. Leave that to me, she said. You, my sweet, must only be perfect. Must only shine so brightly that no one thinks to look for wolves lurking in the shadows of your crown. Far below, the city roared and murmured, unaware of the lines being drawn in quiet rooms. In the yards, Jon swung his sword until his arms shook, feeling more alone than he could remember, unable to say exactly when the laughter around him had begun to sound like something else. Somewhere in the Red Keep's depths, old bones lay in darkness, and if they remembered anything at all, they did not say.